What a remarkable gathering this is, and what a great program has been put together here. So to my dear friend Cole Durham, one of the great scholars in the field of the relationship of church and state and of religious freedom, to Dr. Shenturk and Brian Adams, we all thank you. And please join me in expressing our appreciation to all those who put this conference together. There is no tougher challenge than to try and give a talk while people have food in front of them. So I'm going to ask your help. If you're done with your dessert, if you could just turn your chair around so I get the opportunity to look at you during this time, I would greatly appreciate it. If you're still eating, go ahead, fill up, but do it without clanking the silverware on the plates. Is that a fair exchange? Good enough. Thank you. I deeply appreciate it. This is an exhilarating experience. This is an exhilarating experience to share in this remarkable gathering, this luminous tapestry of religions and cultures and nationality. Like Heinrich Bierfeld, having read a number of the descriptions of the papers and some of the drafts of the papers that you will hear, you are in for an intellectual and spiritual treat, full of challenge and fulfilling ideas and constructs on this urgent issue. And it is a great time to gather again with friends who we see all too rarely across the globe. There could not be a more propitious time to follow up on the successful summit in Brisbane with this gathering in Istanbul, located in this historic intersection of civilizations and religious traditions that have helped define world history. The topic of religion, harmony, sustainable development is one that I know is close to your heart. It is close to mine. For decades, as Cole indicated before assuming the position that I was honored with as Ambassador for Religious Freedom, I represented the largest segment of American Jewry to the United States government and oversaw their social justice programming. And the issue of international development loomed large on my agenda. It began with the advocacy work of the religious community helping to forge the Food for Peace program in the 1970s, all the way through my service these past 15 years on the steering committee of the World Faith Development Dialogue, and I'm delighted to see Catherine Marshall here, who has contributed so much to our efforts linking the World Bank and prominent global religious leaders together, including a number of old friends who I see here today. This is, as we all know, a moment filled with hope and a moment filled with sadness. Across the globe, we see governments, societies, non-state actors, in the name of religion too often, intensify their practices of hate in speech and in action on the streets of our cities, in countries near and far. We see those who resort to violence, conflict, as terror, as a way of resolving differences and achieving domination over others. We see as well the structural, legal, and economic injustice and inequities that still flourish in too many places, taking such a human toll. One of the most effective antidotes to this hate, this violence, this injustice, is the power and effectiveness of interfaith communities of the world working together. You are here, each and every one of you, because you know that power. While we all have challenges we must face on our own, within our own faith communities, and at times we can do some of our best work within our own communities, when we can work together in our vast numbers, we can achieve things none of us can achieve alone. When we can act together effectively, it can be a geometric increase in what we do singly, in our engagement, our openness to hear and learn from each other. We enrich ourselves not only by learning about others with whom we are in cooperative dialogue, but all including learning about those where lack of understanding had long bred mistrust and alienation. But paradoxically, in our exchanges, when we must explain clearly to our interfaith allies, brothers and sisters of our own traditions, and test our own long-held assumptions by the new perspectives we encounter, we deepen and sharpen our understanding of our own faith traditions. And in the very act of doing what we are doing here tonight and over these next days, in the very act of meeting and sharing and dialoguing and working together to bridge the divides and enhance cooperation, we are modeling exactly the kind of world of which we dream and which we all strive to create. Most over these next days will address the role of religion in this work of harmony and sustainable development. Because of my mandate, and I see Katrina Lantos-Sweat and others who have devoted so much to the cause of religious freedom here, I'm going to shape my remarks on the issue of religious freedom and its relationship to harmony and sustainable development. For religious freedom promotes conditions that enhance the ability of religious communities and institutions to express their values in public, to shape the attitude of their followers, and influence policies of their governments in ways that enhance sustainable development goals. Think of the Jubilee campaign on debt relief, the role of engaged religious communities during the HIV/AIDS crisis, the influence of Pope Francis in changing the local, national, and international conversations on the poor and on sustainable environmental practices. Religious communities and institutions have advanced ideas that relate so keenly to sustainable development. Protecting God's creation, accepting responsibility to generations yet to come, one of religion's great contributions to human thought. Living out the obligation to share God's wealth with those of God's children who are less fortunate, not only as a matter of caritas, of charity, but using the words from Hebrew and Arabic, as a matter of fundamental justice, of which many of us understand the divine calls us to do. Harnessing the passion for peace and reconciliation, realizing the obligation rooted in the belief that human beings are created in the image of the divine and charged to imitate God, that human beings are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that each human being has the right to fulfill his or her potential. Now, all these are crucial to achieving greater human rights, sustainable development goals, and greater protection of God's creation. As Pope Francis has powerfully, eloquently, and urgently challenged us, perhaps the most intuitively religious of the great social issues of our day is the challenge of protecting the environment. Think about this. There are millions of houses of worship across the globe. Can you imagine if every one of them took seriously actually contributing to sustainable development, to responsible use of energy sources, to recycling? What a difference it could make, and particularly if they inspired their members and followers to act. It truly can transform the globe. Most indigenous peoples have always lived and spoken powerfully for the natural world that sustains us all. For those of us in the Abrahamic tradition, the foundation of such care is clear. We know why we must be involved. The earth is the eternal's and the fullness thereof. What we own in a trust relationship with God. And that trust requires us to protect God's creation. But the unprecedented urgency of today's crisis challenges our ability to apply our values and traditions to the world in which we dwell. A crisis whose complexities we are only now beginning to see. For our generations, the generations represented in this room, will be marked as the first to see our planet home entrusted to us, the first to really see it. The picture of the whole Earth taken from outer space is the defining image, the icon, the revelation of our generation. No other humans before us experienced this phenomenon. And as we see God's creation from afar, this blue-green home with its great forests and seas, mountains and creatures, it is sweet and precious and good, the way God created and beheld it, Ki Tov, and it was good. But just at the very moment in human history when we see with clarity and wonder and awe how precious is God's creation, we are suddenly confronted by startling evidence of its peril and of damage already being wrought by our own hands, by our greed, by our ignorance, by our indifference, affecting all of us indiscriminately. Global warming, ozone depletion, melting ice caps, which have melted faster in the last 40 years than in the last 10,000, rising sea levels, the escalating eradication of entire species of life, destruction of our rainforests, escalating world population. Numerous current studies show that climate change is advancing far faster than pessimists predicted even a decade ago. Whatever our experience in our particular locale might be, 2014 was the warmest global temperature on record, and NASA and NOAA, the two U.S. agencies that follow this most closely, tell us that 2015 will be even warmer by the end of this year. And barring dramatic action, we're approaching a series of tipping points that will bring cascading changes, causing permanent catastrophic damage that will make sustainable development virtually impossible, knowing full well it will be the poor countries of the globe, the ones that least cause this problem, that will be the first to be affected by it. And I, like you, feel this personally, for this is my home. Everyone I've ever loved, lived, or lives here. Every child, the grandchild of yours and mine, will inherit this home, however we leave it. We must not betray that trust that the generations yet to come have placed in our hand. And so to development, which religious freedom allows religious groups across the globe who see humanitarian and developmental work as essential to their obligations to provide key social services, healthcare, education, food programs, rehabilitation programs, and other. All of us can cite instances where nations or regions that have dysfunctionally in crisis, unable to provide for their citizens, in which religious entities have filled that void, providing vital social services and building relations and trust among segments of that nation. Unfortunately, there are some groups that are doing that. They use that to mobilize recruits for violent extremism, who take advantage of the lack of government capability to build support for their own goals. And in response to that, we sometimes see governments act overbroadly, restricting all or most expressions of religious life, impose crippling regulatory schemes on religion, or outright ban religious groups from engaging in development and humanitarian work. And society and the most vulnerable pay the significant price of that. So too there are countries that deny rights to members of minority or disfavored religious and ethnic groups and restrict their residents from obtaining government services. Let me just mention one example. It's been on many of our minds recently, and I'm not going to take the obvious one of Syrian refugees, but the Rohingya Muslims in Burma, denied a transparent, non-discriminatory, voluntary pathway to equal rights and to citizenship, continuing to face severe legal and economic and social discrimination, an enormous challenge, another wave of migrants, often so far around the world that except for our friends who come from that area, the world is often not on our radar screens. And I mention it precisely because we must never give up hope. The extraordinary results of the election that happened give an opportunity to begin to address structural problems that hold out hope for everyone in that country, in the region across the globe. While religious groups are by no means immune to the temptations of corruption or the abuse of power, there are many areas in which local religious institutions are amongst the most stable, most trusted, most accountable entities serving those communities, where failure to engage them in sustainable development work by governments, international agencies, ignores an indispensable resource. Indeed, houses of worship are often the only institution in small communities in countries across the globe capable of doing good work, even while, in the local level, they may be ill-equipped to function in partnership with international governmental entities, large foundations or NGOs, donor entities, and they need guidance and training and a system that is simple and accessible through which they can contribute to sustainable development goals. Heinrich Bielefeld made this argument. We tend to look to the large entities, forgetting the powerful cumulative impact that the smaller entities can have if we could only engage them in a constructive manner. Sustainable development works best when there is engagement from the local communities in shaping programs. And the connection between religious freedom and development is increasingly visible in the academic literature as well. Academic advocates like Brian Grimm and Greg Clark and Robert Snyder and Ilana Lone and Xiaoming Li and Jun Wu and several, I think a couple are here with us during this conference, have contributed, have demonstrated the correlation between religious freedom and economic growth. Brian's work explains that greater religious freedom correlates with higher levels of GDP. That when there is religious freedom, there is less corruption and increasingly less religious violence. According to Alone's work, countries that have legal protections for religious freedom and treat all members of all religions equally in terms of the distribution of resources have the best economic performance. I think most of you know some of the reasons behind why many think this is true. One thread focuses on Max Weber's argument that certain religious beliefs foster certain traits that are conducive to economic growth, the ethics of hard work, practicing thrift, being honest. Others argue that the social capital that flows from religious gatherings and interactions, religious plurality and diversity, and religious interactions fosters creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship. These analyses cause interesting but difficult questions. Which is the cause and which is the effect? Does economic growth lead to religious freedom? Or does religious freedom lead to greater economic growth? Or do both occur under other conditions that have not fully been explored? Even as the tough work of implementing sustainable development goals continues, we have seen governments, societies, non-state actors, and even religions resort to spreading intolerance, violence, conflict, and terror as a way of addressing differences. And one of the most effective, as I indicated, antidotes to this is religious freedom, which is so under attack. We see historic Christian, Yazidi, other minorities, communities in Iraq and Syria being devastated. We see Baha'is in Iran and Tibetan Buddhists in China and Shia Muslims in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, Rohingya Muslims in Burma, victims of some form of governmental or societal discrimination, such in many cases including harassment, persecution, physical attacks, sexual violence, or forced labor. And even in Western Europe, we're witnessing an increase over the last years in anti-Semitic discourse, an act of desecrations against synagogues, institutions, and communities that we thought we would never see again after World War II. And in the same region, we're seeing this similar increase in anti-Muslim sentiment and the tragedies that we have seen recently in Paris, in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Baghdad, that go on and on. Each one tears at the fabric of our societies, tears at the things that hold us apart, and constitutes a major challenge for us to hold together, and it will be religious communities and interfaith entities that will play a particularly constructive role. And sadly, this list is far from exhaustive, but shows a broad range of threats to religious freedom and religious communities in nearly every corner of the globe. And every attack like that undermines the religious community's contribution to sustainable development. This is one of the key reasons that I was so honored to accept the job that I have now. But I do it knowing that it is, if sustainable development does not succeed, religious freedom will not succeed. And if religious freedom does not succeed, sustainable development will not succeed. They are bound up one with the other. And despite all the challenges, I have to say, in almost every country that I have visited, houses of worship are bursting with energy, prayer, song, with young families, and wherever allowed. Religious communities contribute so much to the commonweal and the social well-being of the societies in which they can function. There is a lot that we have in front of us. Let's do so over these next days. In the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King's warning, who challenged humanity in his remarkable Riverside Church speech, we're now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In the unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing, he said, as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time, and life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with lost opportunities. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations, he concluded, are written the most pathetic epitaph, the words, too late. Well, we are here in part to assert that we will not be too late, to find ways that religion can contribute to societal harmony, to personal harmony, to sustainable development that will lift all of God's children, however you understand religion, to enjoy what every human being is rightfully entitled to enjoy. And if we come away with one understanding, as we look at all the painful history we have endured, let it be this: we are not the prisoners of a bitter and unremitting past. Rather, we can be, we must be, we will be the shapers of a better and more hopeful future. Let that message echo through our deliberations, and let it represent the great contribution that you continue to make. Thank you.